Everybody, how's everybody doing today? Good. DJ, you're always great.
He doesn't know a bad day, let me tell you.
No, I know it, and I love it. I love it. Well, is everybody excited?
Yeah.
And aren't you happy that you're not confused yet? Everybody got a worksheet?
Yes, sir.
All right, we're gonna do something this morning. And by the way, I thought I'd give you a little bit of an update. I think this series is probably going to go for another 2 or 3 weeks, and then we'll be done with it. And if we want to do this again from Revelation, maybe we can do it again sometime. But I don't know what comes next. But Dale and I'm sure we'll be talking about that. So anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. Who's going to read for me?
Me.
Okay. All right. You better get your crayons out. You might want to do some writing. There's lots of places for you to write stuff down today.
So sorry, I had this open earlier, but I had to reboot. So keep bantering for just a second.
Oh, well, today we're going to look at a passage that I've looked at in this class before, but thankfully it's been probably 3 or 4 years ago, and so none of you remember it. We're jumping forward to chapter 12 today, and we're going to continue to look at comparisons between what it means how a Bible tells a story that's non-apocalyptic and how the Bible tells a story that is apocalyptic. And it just happens to be the birth story, the story of Jesus and his birth. So, and how many of you knew that was in the book of Revelation, the apocalyptic version? So that's what we're going to look at this morning. What's our opening question? Well, and the title.
Title is Revelation, Apocalyptic Life Lessons number 8. Probably feels like 12 to you, but it's number 8. On earth as it is in heaven. What comes to mind when you think about the birth of Jesus?
Now, I want you to think in terms of all the images, all the biblical images, good, bad, middle of the road, indifferent, all the little tidbits. And remember, it's only Matthew and Luke that have the birth story. Mark doesn't have it, and Luke and John doesn't have it. But anyway, when you read through, or when you think, and when we get close to Christmas time, and we start studying that stuff, what are the images that pop into your mind?
Amazing.
Okay, amazing. So just an amazing experience. Somebody else.
The business of starting a world religion, who on earth would consider this possibility?
Okay,
God come on earth in a manger.
Right. So can the Zoomers hear that? Do we have Zoomers today?
We do have Zoomers.
Hi, Zoomers.
Mary's zooming there somewhere.
Hello.
Hello.
So if you were going to start a world religion, would you really do it that way? That's good. That's very good. Any other images or thoughts or whatever of that story?
The manger.
The manger.
The wise men.
The wise men. The 3 kings from Orient on.
There were not 3 kings. There were 3 kings, but it made 3 gifts, but there may have been.
That's right. That's exactly right. Good point. They weren't necessarily 3. They just were 3 gifts.
Teacher's pet.
That was always a big deal. Remember, we had to make a big deal of that. We don't know for sure that there were 3. We just know that there were 3 gifts. That's when we had to be right about everything. Then y'all started letting me teach, which meant you gave complete release that idea of being right about everything when you started letting me. Okay, so anybody else? Other images?
Heavenly chorus.
Yeah, the heavenly chorus. Somebody else?
The star.
The star. That's right. Anybody else? Now, y'all are all mentioning the sweet, wonderful, perfect things, which is great. I love it. But there were also some tough things going on.
The animals.
Well, the animals, yeah, they gathered around the manger. Okay.
I mean, that wouldn't be the place I'd want to go first.
I hear you. Anybody else? tough stuff going on too. You know, one of the things that we've mentioned in this class is that there's stories that when we tell our first graders, we don't really spend a lot of time telling them parts of the story. So these wise men that come from afar bringing gifts, they stop off someplace. Where do they stop? Herod. And they ask, hey, Herod. They probably didn't say that, did they? Oh, great king, ye of great knowledge and wonderment, or something like that. I love it when I do that, it buzzes. Have you heard about this, have you seen the star? Have you seen, there's a king, the king of Israel is being born. We're trying to find him. He was foretold in the Old Testament. And Herod, who was king, appointed by Rome, didn't like that idea very much. He didn't want to be in competition with another king. So he told them, hey guys, go find, when you find this king, why don't you come back and tell me where he is? Well, they were told by the Spirit not to do that because Herod had evil intent toward the new king. So when they didn't go back to tell Herod where Jesus had been born, he'd been born in Bethlehem, what did Herod do? He had all of the boy babies 2 years old and younger killed. That's part of the Christmas story. And of course that harkens back to another. So Jesus was the great deliverer of all time. Moses was the great deliverer for the children of Israel, bringing them out of Egypt. And the same thing happened. What was going on? What was Pharaoh doing? Because he was worried that the children of Israel had grown too large and they were afraid that they might revolt. And so what was Pharaoh doing when Moses was born?
Killing the kids.
Killing all of the Hebrew, trying to get the midwives to kill the Hebrew babies, the baby boys. And the whole story of Moses in the what? In the what? In the basket in the Nile River, right? So that he wouldn't be killed, found by Pharaoh's daughter. Interesting connections, huh? Anything else from the story? Well, as difficult and horrific as that, those little parts of the story, there was also the part of the story where to keep Jesus safe because of Herod's evil intents, shortly after he was born, instead of going home to Nazareth, where did Joseph decide they needed to go? Egypt. And they went to Egypt, and it's uncertain exactly how long they were there, maybe 2, maybe 4 years, which it's unclear. But that was, isn't it interesting? And this is one of the things we're going to find in the book of Revelation. There are times in the Bible when people go out of Egypt go into Egypt because it's a safe haven. That would have been Joseph and his family, right? In the Old Testament. That's where the food was. But then it became a bad place to be. So Moses brought them out of Egypt. And then all those years later, when Jesus was born, Joseph took them back to where? To Egypt. Interesting, isn't it? And one of the things there's a concept called wilderness in the Old and the New Testament. In the Old Testament, when they were settling the promised land, when the children of Israel got across the Jordan River and they were settling the promised land, where did the enemies come out of? They came out of the wilderness. In the story of Jesus after his baptism and the temptation, where did Jesus go to be tempted? Into the what? Into the wilderness, yes. And what we're going to see, and then there are we specifically read in the book of Revelation that people would go to the wilderness sometimes for protection, and then there were other times when the really scary bad things would come out of the wilderness. So it's interesting. Egypt and wilderness have these times when that's where you go for protection, but the other times when that's when you get out of there because it's dangerous. All right. All right, having said all that, let's get to the Revelation. And what we're going to do, it's only Revelation 12, 1 through what, 9?
9.
So Dale, would you just read that to us? Don't do it off the worksheet because it's all messed up there. Everybody, what we want, remember we've been talking about overanalyzing and under experiencing. So let's start with experiencing. So close your eyes, don't look at the worksheet, don't pay any attention to the worksheet yet. But if you have a Bible, go ahead and open it to Revelation chapter 12. And let's read this. And by the way, this is an important transitional moment in the book of Revelation. Something really significant has just stopped. We'll get to that in just a minute. But it's as if the whole thing is starting all over again. When you read the book of Revelation, and it, once again, apocalyptic literature. How many of you have heard of, what do they call those Mexican soap operas, telenovelas? Is that what they call them? And what's one of the characteristics? What's a telenovela famous for?
I have no idea. Don't even know what you're talking about.
Okay, well, you're about to get educated here. Anybody else know? Anybody watch telenovelas? Cowboy, I know you watch lots of telenovelas.
I don't like that at all.
So why don't you watch them?
I watch news and sports. That's all I ever watch. In that
Is
order.
anybody going to fess up? It's sort of like watching.
How is a
The
novella
Simpsons.
different than a soap opera?
It's called a telenovela. That's what they're called in Spanish.
Uh-huh.
The
television, it's
soap
a-
operas go on for about 10 to 15 years. Television.
But they're and if you think English soap operas are dramatic or melodramatic, telenovelas take them to a whole nother level. I mean, it's wildly melodramatic. Would you say that's right? Am I saying it right? Cowboy?
I guess so.
He's still saying he's never seen one. I bet he watches one every afternoon. And no, I'm just kidding. So anyway, the book of Revelation is sort of a biblical version of the telenovela. Think what's going on in the book of Revelation. You read it, and as you read it, things just, okay, so you start and it's disturbing what's going on, John, and it's real curious what's going on in the introduction, and then you read more of it, and things sort of settle down with the letters, and then he gets called up into the throne room, and that's a mixture of, oh, that's so wonderful, and yet, boy, I'd been a little uncomfortable if I'd been there, probably. And then this scroll shows up, and everybody so badly wants to know what's in the scroll. We hadn't really talked about the scroll. It's sealed with 7 seals, and initially they're saying, you know what? There is nobody in all of heaven. Imagine that. Nobody in all of heaven that is worthy to open the scroll. And John's reaction to that was what? He cried and cried and cried until an elder came up to him and said, hey, it's okay. We have found someone who can open the scroll. And he pointed at the throne that just before that had the Lion of Judah on it. And John looks back up at it, and now it's got the lamb looking as if it's been slain. And yet that lamb that looks like it's been dead, looks like it's been killed, apparently isn't dead. And it is worthy to open the scrolls. And then when the scrolls, and you've got these, if we could read it like I've suggested that we read it experientially, you would be taken to your emotions would be all over the place, because you would be so thrilled with what is going on in the throne room. Then you would be so sad about the fact that you couldn't open the scroll, and then you'd be so excited that you could. But then when the scrolls start getting open, when those seals, every time a seal comes off, something happens, and sometimes it's pretty messy stuff. And anyway, this whole cycle of things sort of settles down at the end of chapter 11, and you think, okay. And then chapter 12 starts, and the tension. Imagine if you were writing the musical score to go with this if it were a movie. What kind of music would you put with what we're about to write. Okay, you ready to
I'm
read
ready.
to us third graders, to us second graders?
Second graders.
Here we go. Here we go.
There we go. Okay. Got to get ready for this. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky, flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that it might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the wilderness to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1,260 days. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, the ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard in a loud voice in heaven say, now have... Whoa, sorry, my whole screen
What
went
verse you
weird.
on?
11.
Okay, that's far enough.
Okay.
Okay. So if this were made in now that took what, a minute and a half, 2 minutes for you to read that. If this were made into a movie, and I mean not a VeggieTale movie. Do you at least know what VeggieTales are?
I do know what
Okay.
VeggieTales are. 'Cause I'm
No,
a good Christian.
okay, well, go look up telenovela.
I
later.
will.
Not a VeggieTale movie. I mean a big blockbuster Hollywood movie. What would it be rated? If everything that was just described was explicitly filmed, it probably would get an R rating. Maybe these days, maybe PG-13. I don't know. At least there's not any bad language. But look at the scene, folks. I mean, and then he looks and he sees a woman. Now this, I'm going to talk about it for a minute, and then we're going to go make some notes real quickly. Things are, once again, we haven't studied chapters 6 through 11. We haven't looked at those. I hope you've read them, but we haven't looked at those in this class because we're not doing a verse by verse. We're just trying to pull out different experiences. Things have started to settle down at the end of chapter 11. And then all of a sudden, and then he looks and he sees now, obviously this is very interesting. And remember, I've talked about this as being an animated political cartoon. And that's one of the ways for you to think about it. This stuff can't happen. For instance, a story like this wouldn't have ever been told in the Gospels. Because this woman, pretty big woman, her head, what's the in the NIV, what's her pillow?
12 stars.
Well, that's what's on her head, but what's she resting her head on? The sun.
It says she was clothed with the sun.
Oh, clothed with the sun. Okay.
And with the moon under her feet.
And the moon under her feet. So somehow she reaches from the sun to the moon. Now, you and I know how many bazillions of miles that is, right? They didn't, obviously. So there's no way that could be a realistic representation of, but this is what was happening. Okay? Spitting this morning. Aren't you glad you're not sitting close to me? So This can't be an honest representation of something that's happening. Well, at least it can't happen on earth, but it can happen in heaven, and it will happen in apocalyptic literature. So, and she's pregnant and she's about to give birth. And I don't want to get explicit here. You let your imaginations run wild. So, clothed with the sun, feet on at the moon, and the position that she was in to give birth, y'all know what that position is. And at that very vulnerable position, physical position she was in, this red dragon shows up, and where does he place himself? Right where the baby's coming out. Once again, don't want to get too explicit, but that's why I'm saying, what would this movie be rated? And this dragon, which we'll talk more about in just a second, but I just want you to, don't let this just should fill your mind. You will never forget this once you get it. Have y'all ever seen, how many of you have cats? Anybody have a cat? We got a cat. We used to, before we had the cat, we had a lot of those little geckos on the back porch. And guess what? We still have the cat, but we don't have any geckos anymore. And I remember seeing that cat, which is the sweetest little kitty cat, in my arms purring and all this. But boy, not to a gecko. And imagine, so you've seen a cat with a mouse or something, and it's playing with it. And what's its tail doing? Swishing back and forth. And this dragon is crouched where this baby is going to appear when this woman gives birth. And what's the dragon's tail doing? And what's it knocking out of the sky?
Stars.
A third of the stars. And where do they fall? To the earth. Now, folks, if that happened, what would happen to the earth? Because of what do we know about stars? We'll talk about that. All right, this is an incredible story. Let's go ahead now and fill in some blanks. Okay, we've done the experience. Let's do the analysis.
A great sign appeared in heaven. Blank, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head.
Ignore that first blank.
I was wondering.
Well, it's just that this great sign, if you looked at different translations, the word great means something to us. It generally means, how was lunch? Or how was the sermon today? Great, yeah. Nobody else would answer. Come on, you folks. You got to help him out here. So that's not the kind of great here. The great, something's about to happen, and it's not the way that this would be, has been translated in English doesn't give us a sense. The sign was awesome, astounding, and scary. That's the way that this word should be used. And if you read other translations, you'll see it translated in different ways. So it's not just a great sign. Oh, a wonderful sign. No, this is a scary, well, what would you do if you saw something like this happening? You wouldn't use the word great. You would say, I just saw the scariest thing I've ever seen.
Terrifying.
So yeah, terrifying. All right, so let's go ahead now. We will fill in. We're going to read little bits of the passage, and then we're going to fill in some blanks if we can. So go ahead and start one over again, and I won't ask you to start over again anymore.
Okay. A great sign appeared in heaven. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. A sign, a woman, sun, moon, and stars, 12 stars.
So we've talked about the sign already, and we in the West, we really want to know who this woman is. And at this point, if you're going to write something down in that, and I hope you do, write something in the blank. write this down. We don't know yet. We don't have enough information. Now, I know with all of the introductory stuff that you probably think I know, you think we know where we're going with this. But right now, if all we were doing was reading this and sitting there in the first century, the very first time people heard this, and they said, and this woman was introduced, they would not know who she is. Okay. So write down in the woman, we don't know who she is yet. All right. What's the next blank?
Sun, moon, and stars.
Something that you guys need to understand, that we all need to understand. Some of you that are science folks, what is the sun? What is it? What's the sun?
Star. It's a star.
It's a star. What's a star? What's it made up of?
Got gases in it.
Ball of burning gas. It's a nuclear thing that's creating lots of heat and power and gravity and all that kind of. Folks, you need to understand that's what we know and that's how we understand it. And by the way, don't get worried. We may not get through this class today. That's okay. But write this stuff down. As Jesus, or as the angel told
Write this down.
John, write this down on a scroll. Well, you don't have any scrolls. Write this down on the worksheet. The people, the ancients, as we would call them, as we should call them, the people in the Old Testament, the people in the New Testament, they didn't have the same concept of sun, moon, and stars that we do. Even going all the way back to the creation story. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was void and formless, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the water. Well, continues on, and he says, and God said, let there be light. And there was light, but it's not until several days later that he separates the light
From
and he makes a great light. I think it's the fourth day. He makes the great light. Could be the third day. I don't know. Could be, anyway, a great light, and that's the sun, and a smaller light to rule over the what?
the night.
The night, and then all of the celestial, all the stars in the sky. Folks, what y'all need to understand, while you and I understand science and what science has taught us about those things, the people that initially read Genesis, the story of creation, and that would look at those stars, look at the sun, look at the moon, those people, even in the time of Jesus, the people that were reading at the end of the first century, the book of Revelation, believed that those were celestial creatures created by God. They were living beings. The stars were not suns that were so far away that they were little bitty. They were living creatures living in the second heaven, just below the third heaven where God lives. And their job was to rule over the second heaven. So that's what they believed. And so this changes everything about the way we interpret this. This woman who is clothed with a celestial creature, a living heavenly creature. She doesn't have her head on the sun like we think of the sun. And her feet on the moon. This woman, whatever's going on here, somehow has connected her with created beings made by God in the beginning to rule over the day and the night. And so we're already starting to get a sense that there's something good about this woman. This is not an evil woman. There's going to be another woman. I believe it's 19, chapter 19. I think I'd have to go look it up. Sorry. It's the woman we've talked about before, the harlot, the queen of the harlots. laying on the 7 hills, right? She's not, she is not a good person, a good woman, a good image, a good, she represents bad stuff, horrible stuff. But this, just by where this woman is and what she's connected to, would give these people that in the first century the sense that she's probably good and she's got something to do with God. All right. What's next on our work? What's our next blank?
12 stars.
Now, and I really should have said the 12 stars are made up, have been wound in sort of a wreath kind of a way into a what? Into a crown. Don't just take my word for it. What does it say in the text? We're looking at her description. What is it? She is wearing a crown. And the
12
crown
stars on her head.
is woven of 12 stars. We're going to talk more about crowns in just a second. This is another indication, because what are stars to these people?
Celestial beings.
They are living celestial beings created by God to serve him and people. All right. Now, so we're getting more of information about the woman just by where she is and what she's connected to. What's next?
She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. The woman give birth.
So now we're getting, so we've got all kinds of information. We got something to write down in this. This woman is good, is somehow serving God. I don't know what you want to write down. Anybody have any other ideas? She's pregnant. Now, immediately, what does that make us think of?
Jesus.
Jesus, yes. Messiah. Mary. Is this Mary? Okay. Is this another? Now, remember the description of Mary in Matthew and Luke. You remember how it describes Mary? She was a great big woman. Is that the way it's described Mary?
No.
No, this is not apocalyptic literature. She was a humble 13, 14, 15-year-old girl betrothed to be married, and an angel appeared to her. And she said, and the angel said, "Don't be afraid." And she listens to all this, and she's got some questions. How can this be? I'm a virgin. I've never been with a man. How can I have a baby? Well, that question's answered. And then she finally says, well, I don't get all this. I don't understand all this. But if this is what God's got planned for me, then I'm his servant. May it be to me as he wills. And then a little bit later on, when Jesus is born, and that beautiful image not some kind of celestial catastrophic event with a dragon and it's not, nobody mentioned not in the inn, no room in the inn, but it did create sort of a quaint, neat kind of an image for us that this happened in a manger and there were animals around and but there was nobody. But there was somebody trying to kill the baby, wasn't there?
Mm-hmm. The dragon.
And who was that?
Satan.
Well, in the non-apocalyptic version of the story, I don't know. But we still don't have enough information. But what we're starting to see parallels. Are you starting to see parallels from the apocalyptic telling of the story versus the non-apocalyptic telling of the story?
Nature of Satan, who is deceptive, that he's got to look bigger than the reality. So he's got more horns, more crowns, more head, giant tail.
Right. Has he come up yet? Did we read about him yet? We did.
Yes. In the reading.
In the reading. We just read about him?
Mm-hmm. Satan?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Read it one more time.
Then war broke out in heaven.
No. I'm talking about what we just read on the worksheet.
No,
We hadn't gotten
we
there
haven't
yet.
gotten to him yet.
Okay.
Just the huge red dragon.
Okay. So we've
Well,
gotten, but
we
we
haven't even mentioned the dragon yet.
haven't even mentioned in the reading.
In
we
the
haven't
red,
mentioned the
no.
dragon yet. So we're jumping ahead a little bit. All right. Sorry. Anything else we need to fill in the blank on before we move on?
The woman gave birth. She was in pain.
Okay. Lots to say about that, but I probably don't need to say any of it because there are people in here that could say more about it and more effectively than I could because you've given birth. So imagine. So anyway, keep going.
Okay. Then another sign appeared in heaven.
Now this is, well, go ahead. I'm not going to interrupt you because we got blanks to fill.
Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, 7 crowns on its head. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth so that he might devour her child the moment he was born. Another sign?
Now this is once again not another cool, wonderful thing that's going to make everybody warm and fuzzy. That's not the way it read, and that's not what they were expecting as they were listening. And they were right to expect something horrendous, something terrifying. All right. So it's another sign. What's our next?
A big red dragon? I didn't know if I was still doing second grade.
That's good, though. A big red dragon. Just we haven't talked about some of the symbolism in Revelation. Just so you know, colors are important. Red is the color of blood, and it tends to be the color of death, the color of violence. I know we think of red as means stop, but that's not what it means in the book of Revelation. It just, so you've got to, and one of the things that I didn't, the woman was, did it talk about how she was clothed?
The sun and the moon?
By the sun and the moon? She was clothed in white. I think we get to that.
Yeah, we haven't read that yet.
Okay. So colors are very important. Now, I need to say something about this dragon. There were several dragons that people believed in. So this is not simply something that nobody had ever thought of before. This is not like, oh, we've never heard of that. The Old Testament refers to a sea monster that could also be described as a dragon, and he has a name.
Leviathan.
Leviathan is his name. And the ancients believed, and remember, we've already talked in this series and really in the Gospels when we studied the Gospels, we've already talked about the fact how people didn't cruise for fun on the water in ancient days. They were afraid of the sea. And one of the reasons they were afraid of the sea is that if you got caught out in the middle of the sea in a storm and you died and you went down to the bottom and your body was never recovered, then that's where you spent all of eternity, in the grips of the sea monster Leviathan. And this Leviathan creature lived at the bottom of the sea. He slept most of the time. He had many heads, many appendages. He had lots of arms, sort of a squid-like, octopus-like being, only he was huge. And he lived at the bottom of the ocean. Every now and then he would awaken, and when he woke up, he was hungry. And he would begin to thrash around because his food was not fish. His food was floating around on top of the sea in boats. And y'all remember all the stories from the Gospels about when, for instance, just the Sea of Galilee, it's called the Sea of Galilee in some of the Gospels, but I think Luke calls it the Lake of Gennesaret. It was a lake, okay? And it was a big lake, but it was a lake. And by standards of bodies of water, it wasn't very deep. Now, if water is super, super deep, it takes a big, big storm to rile it up. But if water isn't very deep, it doesn't take a huge storm to rile it up. That's why in the shallower, the two significant bodies of water in the Middle East area were the Lake of Gennesaret, or also called the Sea of Galilee, and the Mediterranean Sea. Now, even the Mediterranean Sea is not deep like an ocean's deep. And so it didn't take much of a, so when you read about the apostles or the disciples getting in the boat with Jesus and getting about halfway out and the wind come up and it's a big, it didn't take much of a storm. Some of the storms that we've had around here over the last 3 or 4 weeks would cause great fear and disturbance in a shallow lake. But also, go ahead.
Just look at what it does to the bay.
Yeah, okay. Speak to that. I mean, I've never been on the bay.
Well, I mean, it doesn't take much, and that bay gets very choppy very fast, and
And it's because it's so shallow.
it's because it's very shallow.
And they tell you don't go out there.
So
right?
you
And there
shouldn't
are
be
times
out
when they
there.
Tell you don't go out there. So, so this Leviathan, this creature, when he woke up and started to thrash about, that's where these storms come from. See, that was all part of the mythology, and it was part of the Jewish mythology. And the Jews were Christians, some of them, and so when they think when a red dragon shows up, they immediately think of Leviathan. Plus, he's red, and there's something else going on here that we would completely miss. Have we read about him yet? We gotten to him yet?
The red dragon with 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns on its head.
Though that's really important. So, do we have a fill in the blank for the red dragon?
Yeah, well, that was what we were supposed to be talking
Sorry, can't see it. I wasn't feeling very well yesterday when I was writing this. I even sent Dale a message saying I may not be there today, and I'm not feeling great now. But I can tell y'all aren't either.
about. Big red dragon.
Big red dragon, but that's not that you'd think, well, that's the most significant descriptive, descriptors for him is that he was a big red dragon. That's enough for me and you, right? You walk outside after church is over today, you're working your way toward the car, and there's a big red dragon standing there. What are you going to do? Even those of you that are packing probably aren't going to shoot it. I mean, you don't shoot a red dragon with a handgun. I mean, you probably take off and go, and you come in and get Dale because he can handle anything, right? Hey, Dale, there's a big red dragon out by my car. What should I do?
Not go back out there.
So, but this is not the most important part of the description of the red dragon yet. It actually has something to do with the stuff that just does this to us. So read it one more time, and I'm going to point them out. There's 3 things. Go ahead.
An enormous red dragon with 7 heads,
7 heads,
10 horns,
10 horns,
7 crowns on its head.
7 crowns. So how many heads? Say it with me. How many heads?
7.
7. Say 7 heads.
7 heads.
How many horns?
10.
How many crowns?
7.
All right. You've heard me say before that when God does something in the book of Revelation and it's good, Satan will try to do something and try to make it look good. It's counterfeit, though, because he misses just a little bit and he doesn't get the counterfeit just right. Right? I mean, it's one of the ways they can find out tell whether a $20 bill is a real $20 bill or not. Something's just not right about it, right?
Right.
You can look at it if you know what you're looking for, and you can start it. You've seen them. You've been in every time you hand a $20 bill to somebody in a convenience store these days. What do they do with it?
Mark it.
They mark it, but sometimes they do this, right? They look up at it. This thing that we just moved past is important. So what's just happened? What's happened from chapter 6 to chapter 11 is there's been 3 cycles of 7. When the Lamb holds up the scroll and they say the Lamb can open the scroll in chapter 5, the scroll is sealed with how many seals? 7 seals. Now, every time one of those seals is opened, something happens. And as those 7 seals are opened, trumpets begin to blow. And guess how many trumpets there are?
I'm going to say 7.
7. And after the trumpets have sounded, or as the trumpet, it's all embedded. Have y'all, anybody know what a Russian doll is? What's a Russian doll? Somebody help me explain.
One doll inside the other and then the other new.
Yeah, it's so you get a doll and you open it and there's another little doll inside. And you open it and there's another little doll until they get 10. And you might have a doll this big and it might have 20 dolls in it. And it's called a Russian doll just because they're dolls inside of dolls inside of dolls. Well, that's what's going on. If you were to read 6 through 11, you would see that there are 7, 7, and 7. Now, 7 is an important number. And anytime you see the number 7 in the book of Revelation, it means complete, enough, and it's connected to God. And so when something happens and it's happened 7 times, or there's 7 of them, God is in charge. He's the one making it happen. So you've had 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and 7 bowls before we get to chapter 12. That's fresh in there, huh?
You're running out of time, so make sure you give us what the 7 on the dragon has to do.
The dragon. Okay, so I'll make 2 more points, and then I've got time for 2 more points, maybe.
Yes. Well, my wife goes, you have 7 minutes to tell us about the 7 dragon heads.
Your wife is wonderful.
Yes, she is.
So I'm glad she doesn't have the flu.
Yes, me too.
Now these people have been. See, this is the thing. When we read it, we see the 7 seals. Okay, 7 seals, big deal. 7 trumpets. Okay, big deal. 7 bowls. Big deal. Now it is a big deal. It's a huge deal because it means what's going on. God's in charge of it, and it's enough, and it's complete. Everybody used to say, and you go on YouTube, you go on YouTube and you call up a Revelation study and ask it type in what 7, it'll tell you perfection. Wrong. That's not what it means. In a sense it is, but it's more than that. It's not the right word for us. The right word is complete, enough. It's when God finished his creation on the 6th day. Really, he did this every day. But on the 6th day, he stood back and he'd finished his creation. And he said, you know what? This is what?
Very good.
It's good, not just good. It's very good. It's enough. It's 7. And so on the 7th day, what did he do?
Rested.
He rested. Okay? Because it was complete. It was
Perfect.
enough.
Oh, sorry.
For a while, it was perfect.
Right.
All right. But now let's look at this. We already got problems with this dragon. He's big. He's red. He's waiting to eat a baby as it's born. There's just all kinds of, you don't want to have lunch with this guy. He's not a nice guy. But boy, when you realize that he's got 7 heads, okay, well, no, that's confusing because 7 is connected. That's connection. That's complete. That's to God. I see you looking at your watch over there. But you know what? He doesn't have 7 horns.
No, he's got 10 horns.
He's got 10 horns. 10, anytime you see 10 in the book of Revelation, you know that it is it's hard to describe. It's whatever it is, if it's something that's happening, if it's an event, or if it's a marker on something like this dragon, it tells you two things. It's, first of all, it's not of God. If it's 10, it's not of God. It is of some sort of earthly / political source. And then you go back to the 7 crowns. Here's where we'll end it today. I asked Dale at the beginning of class, and if those of you that have your little computers and you can look things up, go to BibleGateway.com, look up Revelation 12. What verse is that?
The one we just read?
3.
3.
12:3 in the Revised Standard Version.
Revise is what you want?
Well, what do you have?
Anything you want.
Revised Standard Version. Let's go with that. And read that to me.
And another portent appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems
Whoa,
upon
wait a minute.
its head.
All right, folks. Boy, I'm totally out of time, aren't I?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. I'm going to tell you about the crowns next week. There's 2 kinds of crowns in the book of Revelation. There's 2 kinds of crowns in the New Testament. And for whatever reason, only a few of the translations make a distinction. There is a Stephanos crown, and I'll tell you what that is next week. That's where we'll start. And there is a diadem crown, and that's the kind of crown that this dragon is wearing, and that's also problematic. Now, if you read the NIV, all it says is crown and crown and crown. But if you look at it in the original Greek, there is a Stephanos crown and a Greek crown. You had a question.
Yes. So I'm not sure that you can leave like that. So you said 7 is a God thing. 7 is perfection. 7 is means God's involved. And now we have this red dragon come in with 7 crowns and 7 heads. And he's got this 10 in the middle, but I don't really know why the 10's there. Or did the 10 tell us the 7 was obsolete?
All the 10 tells you is that if this dragon, see, this dragon's trying to appear as if it's from God, because it's got 7 on one end and 7 on the other. But in the middle, it's got 7 heads and it's got 7 crowns. But in the middle, it's got 10 horns. Horns. Okay? Signs of power. All right? And the fact that the 10 is there would be a red flag to everybody that's sitting around listening to this in the first century. They would immediately know that's something that wants to look like and appear it's from God, but it's not. And if it's not from God,
It's evil.
it's evil.
Okay. Just wanted to clear that because I don't think you got there.
Did I? Okay. Is everybody clear on that?
Yeah.
So as you go back now to read more, I hope if you finish reading Revelation, just start right over. And every time you see 10, no, not of God. And if it's not of God, it's not good. But Satan, well, he's trying hard to mimic. Folks, think of the sermons that are connected to that, right, preacher? I mean, how many times does Satan try to mimic something, make something that is really good, really a gift?
He appears as an angel of light.
Well, take it another step. The things in this world that are good, but if they're used in the wrong kind of way, become very destructive.
Yeah.
And there are things in relationships. There's just a ton of things.
Money, pride, glory. Yep.
Everything, sex, everything.
Yep.
Pretty much. There's huge lessons here that we don't have time for. Next week, Okay, I'm going to tell you one thing. If you're still taking notes, write these two things down. Here's one of the things I'm going to tell you about the two crowns, and then we'll be through for today. The Stephanos crown is given. The diadem crown is taken.
Mm.
Stephanos crown given. Diadem crown taken. What kind is the beast wearing?
The diadem.
The taken crown. All right, we'll start there with crowns next week.
I have a hymn question then. Royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Should that have been Stephanos?
No.
Oh, good.
That's a beautiful question, because sometimes a diadem is exactly on the head it's supposed to be on.
Mm.
And that song is All Hail the Power of the Great Red Dragon's Name. Isn't that what that song is?
Jesus' name.
All Hail the Power of Jesus' name.
Gotcha. Good. That was a good way to end that.
All right, let's have a word of prayer. I hope you come back, folks. That's part of my prayer. Let's pray. There's so much going on, Father, that we just don't see, because we don't have eyes that can see yet. But you have given us something. You've given us the Spirit. And you've made him our counselor. You've made him the one that can lead us to all truth. That's what Jesus said about him. And he can be our eyes, so we can see when something's a big red dragon and when it's not. Help us to lean on him, the blessed Holy Spirit. Thank you for him. And it's the name of Jesus we pray. And all God's people said,
Amen.